The practice of the dirty dozens, sometimes called playing the dozens, goes way back to the 1800s in the African American community. Most of the time these were harmless word games, but occasionally things would get out of hand and people would get hurt or killed. And sometimes you still see that today. But the overall point I'm trying to make here is that even the current style of rap and hip-hop have origins that are 100 years old or more. This topic flows pretty well into a discussion of the mainstream view of popular trends over the past 120 years or so. If you were a white person in the mainstream culture of the United States from 1890 to about 1960, you saw a number of styles become part of the mainstream. First, the cakewalk, then ragtime, then blues, New Orleans jazz, swing and big band, then rock and roll. That's about where we sit at 1960. If you are part of the mainstream, what you see is a mix of white and black performers of these styles. In the case of rock and roll, you do see black artists like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, but you also see white performers like Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis. So as far as you can tell, this is neither a black nor a white phenomenon, it's just mainstream music. What you don't necessarily see is where these styles came from. The truth is that all these styles originated from African American culture. We had these parallel cultures, mainstream culture, mostly white, and African American culture. We're going to classify this stream as folk music, music that derives from a culture, from the folk. Cakewalk, ragtime, blues, jazz, all the way to rock and roll. All of these styles began in African American culture, but then were appropriated into mainstream culture, most often without giving full credit to where it came from. This trend has continued from the 1960s to the present day. Soul, Motown, R&B, funk, and hip-hop. Although starting in the 1960s, we have gradually done a better job of recognizing African American musicians than before, even though more progress needs to be made. Now, we do need to recognize that there are styles that originate with other cultures, such as country western or bluegrass, but it is remarkable just how much of our music in this country has an African American origin. So what point am I trying to make here? Popular music is nourished by both folk music and classical music. If you want to participate in mainstream culture, I think that's fine. What I hope you will do is recognize all the elements that have gone into making up our culture and where they came from. Again, back to classical or art music. That is another stream that runs parallel to our mainstream culture. If you hear romantic film music, that came from Russian composers like Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff. If you hear epic music as part of a sci-fi or adventure film, that came from Wagner. If you hear weird, creepy music in a horror film, that came from expressionist works like Wozzeck. And recently, music from the minimalist composers have been showing up in films as well. One thing we are going to do for the last week of class is look at some folk styles in the US and how they influence mainstream styles.